Hey, Sipsters. Welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Yeah.
You know how sometimes you're just like browsing online and you stumble upon something that just like sends chills down your spine?
Yeah, like those videos of people trying to eat a live octopus.
Oh, God.
It totally freaks me out.
Haha. No, not quite that intense.
Okay.
But definitely unsettling. Lately, I've been like reading all these articles about scams.
Yeah.
Specifically in Cambodia and Myanmar, and it's seriously messed up stuff.
Yeah, I've seen some headlines about that too.
Yeah.
What have you been reading?
Like a whole stack of stuff actually reports news articles, even some personal accounts from victims.
Oh, wow.
And it's wild how deep this rabbit hole goes. Like, we've all seen those too good to be true job ads online, right?
Right.
But what I'm finding is way more sinister than just your average internet scam.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Give me the lowdown.
Good.
What's so sinister about these scams?
Well, it all ties back to China's One Belt, One Road initiative, which is basically this massive global investment plan. On the surface, it seems like a good thing, right? Infrastructure, economic development, all that jazz.
Yeah.
But the more I read, the more I realized that there might be some unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences? Like what?
Like, remember all those stories about Chinese workers being exploited on some of these One Belt, One Road projects?
Mm-hmm.
Forced labor, withheld wages, passports being confiscated?
Yeah, that's messed up.
Pretty horrific.
But what does that have to do with scams?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. It seems like the influx of Chinese money and workers into places like Cambodia and Myanmar has created this perfect storm for criminal organizations to take advantage of.
Ooh, okay, now I see where you're going with this. You're saying there's a connection between the One Belt, One Road initiative and the rise of these scam operations.
Exactly, and it's not just speculation. There are actual reports of Chinese nationals being arrested for running these scams, and we're talking huge, i.e. sums of money involved.
So you're saying that while China is investing in these countries, there are also criminal elements exploiting the situation for their own gain.
Yep. It's like this shadow economy running parallel to the official development projects.
Mm.
And the victims are often vulnerable people looking for a better life.
That's heartbreaking. But how are they being lured into these scams?
That's the crazy part. They're using all sorts of tactics. Fake job offers, romance scams, even kidnapping.
Wow.
They prey on people's hopes and dreams, promising them a life they could only imagine.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. And you're saying this is all happening in Cambodia and Myanmar. Why those countries specifically?
Well, from what I've read, it seems like both countries have become sort of havens for these scam operations. And there's specific reasons why. Take Sihanoukville in Cambodia, for example.
Okay.
It's sometimes called Westport because of the massive Chinese influence there.
Oh, Westport.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember hearing something about that. What's the deal with that place?
Well, it was supposed to be this booming coastal city with casinos and resorts attracting tourists from all over. But things took a dark turn. It attracted a lot of Chinese investment, but it also attracted organized crime. And when Cambodia cracked down on gambling, these criminal groups needed a new way to make money.
Right.
Enter online scams.
So basically, Sihanoukville became a hub for these criminal organizations to set up shop and start running their online scam operations.
Exactly. And they're not just targeting people in Cambodia. They're reaching out to victims in China, Taiwan, Vietnam, even some from the U.S. and Europe.
Wow, the scope of this is way bigger than I imagined. It's scary to think how easily people can be tricked and exploited.
Right. I mean, I consider myself pretty savvy online, but even I'm starting to look at my DMs with a bit more suspicion now.
Yeah, me too. So if these scams are so widespread and sophisticated, what can people do to protect themselves?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, after reading all of this, I'm not sure there's a foolproof answer, but there are definitely some red flags to watch out for and some steps we can take to minimize our risk.
Okay, good. So tell me, what have you learned from all your research? What's the most important takeaway so far? So spill the tea. What are the biggest red flags people should be aware of?
Okay, so first and foremost, if a job offer seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
Especially if it involves traveling to a foreign country for a vague or undefined role.
Right.
Like, who wouldn't be suspicious of a job posting that says, make $10,000 a month working from paradise, no experience necessary?
Yeah, that screams scams.
Right. And it's not just about the money. Pay attention to the language used in the job description. Is it full of hype and buzzwords but lacking specifics about the actual work? That's another major red flag.
Okay, so vague descriptions and outrageous salaries. What else?
Be wary of any job offer that pressures you to make a quick decision. Scammers often try to create a sense of urgency to prevent you from doing your due diligence.
That makes sense. They don't want you to have time to think it through or do any background checks.
Exactly. Legitimate companies understand that you need time to consider your options.
What about those unsolicited messages you mentioned earlier? Any tips for avoiding those?
Oh yeah, definitely be cautious of any random messages from strangers promising you easy money or amazing opportunities, especially if they're pushing you to click on a suspicious link or download an unknown app. It's better to be safe than sorry. So just ignore those messages or report them as spam.
Good advice. It's like my grandma always says, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Right. And remember, scammers are getting increasingly sophisticated in their tactics. They might create fake profiles on social media or dating apps, pretending to be someone they're not to gain your trust.
That's so creepy. It's like they're trying to play on people's vulnerabilities and desires.
Exactly. They're master manipulators. And that's what makes this whole thing so discerning. It's not just about losing money. It's about the emotional and psychological toll it takes on the victims.
I can only imagine. Have you come across any personal stories from victims in your research?
Oh yeah, tons. And some of them are absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
There was one story about a young woman from Taiwan who was lured to Cambodia with the promise of a job as a customer service representative. She ended up being held captive in one of these scam compounds, forced to work 12-hour shifts, and subjected to horrific abuse.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. Did she ever manage to escape?
She did eventually, but she was deeply traumatized by the experience. And it's not an isolated incident. There are countless stories like hers out there.
It makes you realize how vulnerable people can be, especially when they're desperate for a better life.
Right, and it highlights the fact that these scams are often linked to other forms of organized crime, like human trafficking and forced labor. It's a complex web of criminal activity that can be incredibly difficult to unravel.
So what happens to the victims who don't manage to escape?
That's the scariest part. Many of them are trapped in these compounds, forced to work as scammers themselves, and subjected to unimaginable horrors. Some are even sold to other criminal organizations or forced into prostitution. It's a nightmare scenario.
This is so heavy. It's hard to believe that this is happening in the 21st century.
I know, right? It's a stark reminder of the dark side of globalization and the lengths that some people will go to for profit.
So if these scams are so widespread and sophisticated, what can be done to stop them? It feels like we're all just one click away from becoming a victim.
Well, it's definitely not a simple solution. It's going to require a multifaceted approach involving governments, tech companies, and individuals working together.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's break it down. What can governments do to address this issue?
Well, first and foremost, they need to acknowledge the problem and prioritize cracking down on these criminal organizations. That means investing in law enforcement resources, strengthening cross-border cooperation, and putting pressure on countries where these scams are flourishing to take action.
Right. It sounds like international collaboration is key here. But what about the role of tech companies? I mean, a lot of these scams are happening on their platforms. Can't they do more to prevent them?
Absolutely. Tech companies have a responsibility to create safer online environments and to take proactive measures to prevent these scams from happening in the first place.
Like what? Give me some specifics.
Well, for starters, they can invest in better detection technologies to identify and flag suspicious activity. They can also work with law enforcement to shut down fake accounts and websites and track down the perpetrators.
Okay, that makes sense. But I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on catching the scammers after the fact. What about preventing people from becoming victims in the first place?
You're absolutely right. Prevention is crucial. And that's where education comes in. Governments and tech companies need to work together to raise awareness about these scams, teach people how to identify red flags, and promote online safety best practices.
Yeah, like those public service announcements they used to play on TV about stranger danger. Maybe they need a digital version for the internet age.
Exactly. We need to educate people about the potential risks of the online world, especially when it comes to sharing personal information and engaging with strangers.
So what can we as individuals do to protect ourselves and others?
Well, aside from being aware of the red flags we talked about earlier, it's important to be cautious about what we share online. Think twice before posting personal information like your phone number, address, or financial details. And remember, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Good advice. It's like that old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. If you receive a job offer or an online message that seems suspicious, do your research. Check the company's legitimacy. Look for reviews online and reach out to someone you trust for a second opinion.
Okay, so be informed, be vigilant, and be skeptical. Got it. But what about those who have already fallen victim to these scams? Is there any hope for them?
It's definitely a difficult situation, but there are organizations dedicated to supporting victims of human trafficking and online scams. They provide resources like legal aid counseling and even rescue operations.
That's good to know. It's heartbreaking to think about the trauma these victims have endured.
It is. And it raises some important questions about the role of governments and corporations in all of this. I mean, how much responsibility do they bear for creating an environment where these scams can thrive? Are they doing enough to protect their citizens and workers?
That's a complex issue. I mean, on the one hand, you have governments pushing for economic development and investment, but on the other hand, you have these criminal elements exploiting the situation for their own gain. It's a tough balance to strike.
It is, and it's not just about China either. Other countries are involved in the One Belt, One Road initiative, and they also have a responsibility to ensure that these projects don't create opportunities for exploitation.
It's like this tangled web of interconnected interests and motivations, and it's hard to know where to even begin to untangle it all.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating and frustrating at the same time.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, no quick fix.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, the dangers, and the potential solutions. But I'm curious, from all your research, what stood out to you the most? What's the most insightful takeaway you've gleaned from all of this?
You know, it's funny, after going through all this research,
Yeah.
what really hit me was the realization that these scams are like a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
The dark side of globalization. It's like we're all so interconnected now, but those connections can be exploited just as easily as they can be used for good.
Yeah, that's a really profound insight. It's like globalization has created this vast network of opportunities, but it's also opened up all these new avenues for exploitation.
Exactly. And I think Cyanophil is a perfect example of that. It's like this microcosm of the potential pitfalls of unchecked development.
Right.
You have this influx of foreign investment and this promise of economic prosperity.
Yeah.
But without proper regulation and oversight, it can quickly devolve into a haven for criminal activity.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale for sure. It shows how economic development doesn't always benefit everyone equally.
Right.
And that it can create winners and losers. And in this case, the losers are often the most vulnerable members of society.
Right. It's like the people who are most desperate for a better life are the ones who are most susceptible to these scams. They're willing to take risks, to believe in promises that seem too good to be true because they feel like they have nothing to lose.
It's heartbreaking. And it makes you wonder, what can we do to create a more just and equitable global system? How do we ensure that globalization benefits everyone and not just a select few?
We need to educate ourselves about the potential risks of globalization, the ways in which people can be exploited, and the steps we can take to protect ourselves and others.
I agree. Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these complex issues, the better equipped we'll be to navigate them and to advocate for change.
Right. It's like we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend these problems don't exist. We need to have open and honest conversations about the dark side of globalization, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And those conversations need to happen at all levels. From individual discussions to policy debates on the global stage, we need to hold governments and corporations accountable for creating a more just and equitable world.
I love that. It's like we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things. We need to be proactive and engaged citizens.
Absolutely. And it's not just about grand gestures or sweeping reforms. It can start with small actions in our everyday lives, like being mindful consumers, supporting ethical businesses, and advocating for fair trade practices.
Yeah, it's like every choice we make, every dollar we spend has an impact. We have more power than we realize.
Exactly. And if we all make a conscious effort to use our power for good, we can create a ripple effect that can lead to real and lasting change.
Okay, Sipsters, I'm officially feeling inspired. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a challenge. What's one thing you can do today to make a difference in the fight against exploitation and injustice?
It could be something small, like sharing an informative article on social media or donating to an organization that supports victims of human trafficking. Or it could be something bigger, like contacting your elected officials and urging them to take action on these issues.
Whatever it is, take action. Let's use our collective power to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live a life free from exploitation.
Beautifully said. And remember, Sipsters, we're all in this together.
Cheers to that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the dark side of globalization. We hope you learned something new and that you're feeling empowered to make a difference. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, and stay engaged.
And remember, Sipsters, every sip counts.
I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.